The Weight of Silence. A novel. Chapter 1. The Empty Classroom. The rain started at 6:04 p.m. The same minute Elena Cortez should have walked through the front door of 14 Birch Hollow Road and did not. Ashford Hollow, Vermont, sat in the kind of valley fog loves. Low hills furred with birch and pine, a creek that never quite froze even in January, and a main street 4 blocks long that still had a hardware store instead of a chain pharmacy. By late October, the maples had gone the color of rust and blood, and the wind off Miller's Creek carried the mineral smell of coming frost. The town's only stoplight blinked yellow after 8 o'clock. People here still left keys in unlocked doors. At Ashford Hollow Regional High School, on Route 9, just past the Sunoco station, room 214 stayed lit until 5:40, its window a small gold rectangle against the graying sky. Elena Cortez, 29, taught 11th grade English there, and on Friday evenings she stayed late grading essays because her apartment on Cedar Street had thin walls and a downstairs neighbor who practiced trumpet. She was last seen by Marcus Webb, the night janitor, wheeling his cart past her door at 5:52 p.m. He would tell Detective Mara Voss 3 days later that Elena had been standing at the window with her arms crossed, phone pressed to her ear, saying something like, "I can't keep doing this," before she noticed him and smiled and said goodnight, the way she always did. Bright, a little too bright, the smile of someone who had practiced being fine. Her car, a silver 2019 Honda Civic, was found the next morning in the school's rear lot. Doors locked, purse on the passenger seat, phone dead in the cup holder. Her travel mug of coffee sat undisturbed in the driver's door pocket, gone cold sometime around midnight. Elena Cortez had vanished into 30 feet of empty asphalt and a wall of maple trees, and no one had heard a single sound. Chapter 2. Detective Voss. Mara Voss was 41 years old and had not slept more than 4 consecutive hours in 19 years. She kept her dark hair cropped short because long hair required decisions she didn't have time for. And she wore the same navy peacoat through 3 Vermont winters, because replacing it felt like admitting the last one had ended. She had pale gray eyes that made suspects nervous, and colleagues say she looked like she was reading their obituary. She was, by every measure the Ashford Hollow Police Department kept, its best investigator, and by her own private measure, a woman who had failed to find one missing person in particular for 2 decades, and had spent every case since trying to make up for it. Her sister, Callie Voss, had disappeared from the same town when Mara was 21 and Callie was 17. No body, no car, no note, just an empty bedroom and a window left open to let out a summer that never came back the same way twice. Mara did not talk about Callie. She kept a photograph of her in the glove compartment of her Crown Victoria, not the dashboard, not the wallet, the glove compartment where she could close a door on it. She arrived at the high school parking lot at 7:15 Saturday morning in a light drizzle, Officer Thomas Whitfield jogging to keep pace beside her. Whitfield was 27, built like he still played the college hockey he talked about too often, and eager in the specific way of someone who had not yet learned that most cases end badly for someone. "Principal Finch called it in himself," Whitfield said, flipping his notebook open against the wind. "Said he swung by to grab paperwork and saw the car still here from Friday. At 7 in the morning on a Saturday." Mara crouched by the Civic's rear tire, studying a smear of mud that didn't match the lot's gravel. "Convenient. You think Finch is involved?" "I think everyone's involved until they're not." She stood, knees complaining the way they always did now. Get the janitor's statement typed up exactly the way he gave it. Don't clean up his grammar. People's exact words matter. The maples behind the lot dripped steadily onto a bed of wet leaves, and beyond them the tree line thickened into Pine Brook Forest. 4,000 acres of state land that the local kids use for bonfires and the local hunters use for deer, and Mara knew from a childhood she tried not to revisit, the local secrets used for hiding. She looked at that tree line for a long time before she said anything else. Chapter 3. The Fiancé. Daniel Reyes answered the door of the Cedar Street apartment in a gray Henley with a coffee stain on the collar, his eyes red-rimmed, his stubble 2 days past intentional. He was 34, broad-shouldered from a decade of framing houses for Reyes & Sons contracting, with the kind of handsome, symmetrical face that made people trust him before he'd said a word. That was, Mara had learned in 20 years of this work, exactly the kind of face she trusted least. "Have you found her?" he asked before Mara had introduced herself. His voice cracked on found. "Not yet, Mr. Reyes. I'm Detective Voss. Can we come in?" The apartment was small, warm, and smelled of burnt coffee and something floral. Eleanor's candles, unlit now, arranged on the windowsill like they were waiting for her to come strike a match. A ring sat in a small velvet box on the kitchen counter, lid open, as if it had been taken out and put back many times. "We were supposed to go to dinner Friday," Daniel said, sitting heavily on the couch. "Rosalie's, 7 o'clock. She never showed. I called 9 times. He held up his phone as evidence, as though the call log itself might exonerate him. "I drove to the school around 8:30. Her car was there. I don't know what I thought. I called the police non-emergency line, and they told me to wait 24 hours. Where were you between 6 and 8:30? His jaw tightened, just slightly, a muscle working under skin. "Here, getting ready." "Alone?" "Yes." A pause, half a second too long. "Detective, you don't think... Elena and I were getting married in April." Mara let the silence sit the way she always did, long enough to become uncomfortable, because the uncomfortable ones were the ones that told her something. Daniel Reyes filled it himself. "Look, we'd had a fight. Wednesday night. It was stupid. About the wedding budget, about her working too much, about... It doesn't matter. It was stupid. I love her." His hands, she noticed, were shaking. Whether from grief or something else, she couldn't yet say. On her way out, Whitfield murmured, "He seems genuinely torn up." "So did the last one," Mara said, and didn't elaborate. But she wrote 3 words in her notebook underlined twice. Alone. Fight. Budget. Chapter 4. What the Coffee Mug Knew. The rain thickened into a proper autumn storm by Sunday, hammering the tin roof of the Ashford Hollow Police Department on Elm Street, a squat brick building with a single holding cell and a coffee machine older than Whitfield. Mara stood at the whiteboard in the small conference room, marker in hand, county forensic report spread across the table. Coffee in the mug was cold, consistent with being poured around 4 p.m. and left untouched, she said. No struggle indicated in or around the vehicle. Purse contents undisturbed, wallet, $42 cash, credit cards all present. This isn't a robbery. "Could be an abduction," Whitfield offered. "Someone she knew got her to walk to the tree line willingly." "Could be." Mara capped the marker. "Or she walked there on her own 2 feet and didn't want anyone stopping her." "You think she ran?" "I think a woman who leaves her purse and her fiancé's ring but not her phone charger from her desk because the charging cable's gone, I checked, didn't get dragged anywhere." Mara tapped the photo of room 214's desk. She took 2 things with her. Her phone, which died and was left in the car, meaning she used it right up until she walked away. And a charger, meaning she planned to need power somewhere else. "So where's the phone data?" "Warrant's in with the carrier. Should have pings by Tuesday." She rubbed her eyes. In the meantime, I want everything on Elena Cortez, not the missing poster version, the real one. Bank statements, texts, who she talked to, what she was scared of. Whitfield hesitated. You said scared. You think somebody was threatening her? Mara thought of the janitor's account. I can't keep doing this, and did not answer right away. I think, she said finally, that a woman who was leaving her boyfriend doesn't usually vanish into a forest in the rain without telling a single soul where she's going, unless she's more afraid of being found than she is of the woods. Outside, thunder rolled over Pine Brook, and somewhere past the tree line, a barred owl called twice and went silent. Chapter 5. Principal Finch's Ledger. Walter Finch's office at the high school smelled of pipe tobacco he wasn't supposed to smoke indoors and old paper. He was 58, silver-haired, dressed in the kind of tweed jacket that made him look like he belonged in a much older photograph, and he had the particular stillness of a man used to being believed simply because of his title. Ms. Cortez is an excellent teacher, he said, folding his hands atop his desk. Beloved by students. I've known her since she started here 6 years ago. Any conflicts with faculty? Students? Parents? Mara asked. None that I'm aware of. Financial trouble at the school this year? Budget cuts? Anything staff might be upset about? Finch's hands, which had been perfectly still, adjusted a pen a half-inch to the left. Small. Automatic. The kind of tell a man doesn't know he's giving. The district's always tight on funds, Detective. That's education in this state. Mara let that sit, then asked gently, almost as an afterthought, Mr. Finch, do you know anything about a discrepancy in the activities fund? I ask because Ms. Cortez ran the yearbook committee, and yearbook committees keep receipts. Careful ones. For just a moment, something moved behind Walter Finch's eyes. Not guilt exactly, but the calculation of a man deciding how much rope to give a question before pulling it back. I have no idea what you're referring to. Of course, Mara said, and stood and thanked him for his time, and did not believe a single word of the last 4 minutes. That night, she pulled Elena's bank records under the warrant and found, buried in 6 months of grocery runs and student loan payments, 4 deposits of $2,000 each, cash, no memo, arriving on the first of the month like clockwork. The most recent had come in 11 days before she disappeared. Someone had been paying Elena Cortez to keep quiet about something, and Mara intended to find out what. Chapter 6. The Groundskeeper. Pine Brook Forest's western edge backed onto a gravel access road that the town used for the water tower, and at the end of that road sat a low cedar shingle cabin that had belonged, for as long as anyone could remember, to Silas Cutter. 66, the school district's groundskeeper for 31 years, a wiry man with a white beard gone yellow at the corners from pipe smoke, hands scarred from decades of chainsaw work, and eyes that watched everything and said almost nothing. Mara had known him her whole life. He had taught her to identify deer trails when she was 9 years old, the same summer, though she hadn't thought of it in years until she stood on his porch now. That her sister had started disappearing for hours at a time into these same woods. Detective, Silas said, not surprised to see her, the way he was never surprised by much. Coffee's on if you want it. I want to know if you've seen anything unusual out here, past week or so. He studied her a moment longer than the question required. Unusual like what? Like a young woman walking alone, like tire tracks that don't belong to your truck, like anything, Silas. He was quiet, poking at the wood stove with an iron rod, sparks lifting and dying. Woods keep their business, he said. Always have. Elena Cortez is missing. 29 years old, loved by her students. Somebody's afraid for her, and I need you to think harder than that. Something in his face shifted. Not guilt, Mara would think later, but grief. Old grief. Worn smooth like a stone in a pocket. I haven't seen your teacher, he said. I'd tell you if I had. Would you? The question hung there, and for one unguarded second, Silas Cutter looked at her the way he had looked at her the week Kelly Voss disappeared 20 years ago, sorrowful and careful and closed like a door someone had decided long ago never to open again. Go home, Mara, he said quietly. Storm's coming in worse tonight. She left with more questions than she'd arrived with, and the growing, unshakable sense that Silas Cutter knew far more about the woods behind that school than any groundskeeper had a right to. Chapter 7. The Affair. The carrier's data came back Tuesday afternoon, and it told Mara two things. First, that Eleanor's phone had pinged off the tower nearest the school until 6:09 p.m. Friday, 9 minutes after she was last seen, and then gone dark, not powered down gradually, but killed instantly, the way a phone dies when someone removes the battery, or, more likely, when someone simply turns it off and never turns it back on. Second, that the number calling her most frequently over the past 4 months, 11 times in the final week alone, belonged to Walter Finch's personal cell phone, not his school line. Mara brought him in Wednesday morning. The interview room at the station had one window, barred, looking out onto a parking lot going silver with sleet, and a table bolted to the floor that had seen 4 decades of nervous hands. 11 calls in a week, Mr. Finch. 4 cash deposits of $2,000 into Elena Cortez's account. I don't think you are discussing yearbook budgets. Finch's composure, so carefully worn in his office, cracked along a seam. He put his face in his hands. It wasn't what you think, he said. There was a relationship. 2 years ago. Brief. It ended. I'm a married man, detective. I have grandchildren. Do you understand what this would do to... Was she blackmailing you? No. His head snapped up. No, God, no. She wasn't like that. I was paying her back. His voice thinned. There was a fund. A private scholarship account for students who needed emergency help, textbooks, winter coats, things the district budget wouldn't cover. I borrowed from it. Years ago when my daughter got sick, before insurance covered the treatment. I meant to pay it back and I couldn't. And Elena found the discrepancy when she took over yearbook and activities oversight last spring. She never once threatened to expose me. She told me to fix it quietly. I've been putting money back every month since. That's what the deposits were. I was funneling her cash to redeposit into the scholarship account through her, because if I did it myself, the auditor would flag the pattern immediately. And if she did it, no one would look twice. Teachers make small deposits, run bake sales, whatever. It was never about her keeping quiet. It was about protecting the fund and protecting my family. Mara studied him for a long time. It was absurdly a plausible story, and plausible stories usually were true because the truth so rarely bothered being clever. Where were you Friday night, 6 to 9 p.m.? At my daughter's in Rutland, 40 minutes away. My son-in-law will confirm it. I have receipts from the gas station, the restaurant. I can give you everything. She let him go 2 hours later, alibi confirmed by 3 independent sources before sundown. Walter Finch was guilty of embezzlement and cowardice and a decades-long affair he'd tried to bury under good intentions. He was not guilty of touching Elena Cortez, which meant Mara had spent 4 days chasing the wrong shadow. And somewhere out past the tree line, the rain kept falling on ground that had already swallowed one Ashford Hollow girl and might now be closing over a second. Chapter 8. The Fight. Thursday brought a break, but not the kind Mara wanted. A text thread, recovered from the cloud, back up on Elena's dead phone, showed a fight with Daniel, dated the Wednesday before she vanished. The fight he'd admitted to, but not the words he'd used. Daniel: "You can't keep bringing this up. I said I was sorry." Elena: "Sorry doesn't undo what you did to my car. You slashed my tire, Daniel, because I went to dinner with my sister without telling you first." Daniel: "It was one time. I was drunk. I've never touched you." Elena: "You don't have to touch someone to make them afraid of you." Mara read it twice, then a third time, feeling the floor of the case tilt beneath her. She thought of the janitor's account. I can't keep doing this. And it no longer sounded like a woman ending things with a controlling employer. It sounded like a woman ending things, period, with someone who scared her badly enough to slash a tire as a warning. She drove to Cedar Street with Whitfield in the passenger seat and a search warrant folded in her coat pocket, sleet needling the windshield, wipers barely keeping pace. Daniel Reyes opened the door already pale, as though he'd been expecting this exact car and this exact weather. "We need to search the apartment, Mr. Reyes, and we need you to come down to the station." "I didn't hurt her." His voice broke entirely this time, no performance left in it. "I know how the tire thing looks. I was an idiot. I was jealous. I've never been more ashamed of anything in my life. But I did not touch Elena Friday night. I was here, alone. I have no way to prove that, and I know exactly how bad that sounds, and I don't care, because it's the truth." They found nothing in the apartment. No blood, no signs of violence, nothing but a man's guilt occupying every room like furniture. Daniel's cell records placed his phone at the apartment's tower the entire evening. Though, of course, Mara knew, a phone left behind proved nothing about the man who carried it. Still, as she stood on the wet sidewalk with the case sprawling in 3 directions at once, Finch's confession, Daniel's temper, Silas Carter's strange grief in his eyes, Mara Voss felt, for the first time in 20 years, the particular vertigo of a case that reminded her, bone deep, of the one she had never solved. She drove home that night, took the photograph of Callie out of the glove compartment for the first time in 3 years, and sat with it on her kitchen table until the coffee went cold and the storm outside finally, mercifully, broke. Chapter 9. What the Forest Kept. Friday, 1 week to the day since Elena Cortez disappeared, Mara went back to Silas Carter's cabin alone, against protocol, without Whitfield, because some conversations she'd learned long ago only happened when there was no audience. The sky had cleared overnight into a hard, bright cold, frost silvering the dead grass, her breath fogging in front of her as she walked the gravel road. Smoke rose thin and straight from Silas's chimney. He was sitting on the porch when she arrived, as if he'd known she was coming, whittling a piece of birch with a knife that had clearly done 30 years of that same slow, patient work. "You didn't come out here for coffee," he said. "Callie used to come out here, didn't she?" It wasn't a question, not really. Mara's voice was steady in the way that cost a person everything to keep steady. "I found her diary in a box last year, going through my mother's things after she passed. There's an entry from that summer. She wrote about a place in the woods where she felt safe. She never named it. But she talked about an old man who didn't ask questions." Silas set the knife down. "You helped her leave, didn't you?" Mara said. 20 years ago, my sister wasn't taken. She left, and you helped her." The silence stretched long enough that Mara heard a woodpecker start up somewhere behind the cabin, hammering 3 times and stopping. "There was a man she was seeing," Silas said finally, quietly, the words coming like they'd been buried under 3 decades of frost and were only now, reluctantly, thawing. "Older, bad temper. Your mother liked him fine because he had money and manners in front of her. Kelly came to me one night, 16 years old, crying so hard she couldn't get a full sentence out. I'd known her since she was a girl running these trails. I had a cousin outside Burlington who took in girls who needed to disappear from somebody. Not the state, not the system, just gone, quiet, safe. I drove her there myself, told her never to write, never to call, not till she was sure it was safe. Because in a town this small, any thread pulled hard enough unravels the whole coat. Mara's hands had gone very still in her lap. She's alive, was last I knew. 9 years back my cousin passed and the thread went with her. I don't know where your sister is now, Mara. I swear that to you on my own life. But she walked out of that house on her own 2 legs, and she wasn't taken by anybody but her own fear. And I have carried the weight of not telling you that for 20 years, because I promised her I never would. His voice cracked, just slightly, an old man's grief finally given air. I am sorry. I am so sorry. Mara sat with that for a long, long moment. 20 years of guilt, of blaming herself for not hearing her sister cry out some window she'd left open, restructured in an instant into something almost unbearably different. Her sister had chosen to live and had needed this stranger, this quiet keeper of the woods, to help her do it. And then, with the terrible clarity of a detective's mind, refusing to rest even inside her own grief, Mara understood exactly where Elena Cortez had gone. You did it again, she said softly. Didn't you, Silas, last Friday? Silas Cutter looked at her for a long moment and did not deny it. Chapter 10. The Cabin at Miller's Creek. He drove her there himself, in his truck, up a fire road that hadn't seen a snowplow yet this season, 6 miles past the water tower, into a hollow where a second, smaller cabin sat hidden behind a curtain of hemlock, invisible from any road, heated by a propane tank Silas refilled twice a year and told no one about. Smoke rose from its chimney too. Mara knocked, and after a long pause, the door opened on a chain, and then, seeing Silas's face behind the detective's shoulder, opened the rest of the way. Elena Cortez stood there in an oversized flannel shirt that wasn't hers, hair pulled back, a fading yellow-green bruise along her jaw that had not, Mara noted with a cold and precise fury, come from any slashed tire. He hit you, Mara said, not a question. Elena's composure, the same too bright, practiced composure the janitor had described, finally broke, and she started to cry, the sound of someone who had been holding a scream in her chest for a very long time and had finally set it down. Wednesday night, she whispered. The fight wasn't about my sister. That's what I told him to say to people, if he ever had to say anything at all. He grabbed me by the jaw so hard I heard something click. He cried after, said he'd never do it again. He said that 4 times in 8 months. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. I couldn't go to the police. He has friends here. His family's from 3 towns over. Everyone loves him. Everyone would have said I was hysterical, exaggerating, and I would have had to go back to that apartment every night until a court date that might take a year. Sleeping 20 feet from a man who'd already put his hands on my throat once. I couldn't do that. So, when Mr. Cutter found me crying in my classroom 2 weeks ago, I run the greenhouse club, he does the grounds, we talk. I told him everything, and he told me about a place. He said I wasn't the first person from this town who'd needed one. Mara looked at Silas Cutter, this quiet, grief-worn man who had spent 30 years hiding a decades-old kindness inside the ordinary work of mowing lawns and clearing brush, protecting women the system had no room to protect, at a cost to his own conscience that Mara, who had spent 20 years hating an absence she now understood was, in its own way, a kind of mercy, could finally, achingly comprehend. "You could have told me," Mara said to him, though there was no real anger left in it, only the exhausted ache of 20 years finally exhaling. "Would you have let her disappear if I had?" Silas asked. "Would the department? Or would there have been reports and a restraining order that takes 3 weeks to process, and a man who knows exactly where she sleeps every one of those 21 nights?" Mara didn't have an answer for that. She wasn't sure there was a clean one. Chapter 11. What the town never knew. They did it right after that. As right as a system built for tidy answers could manage a messy, true one. Elena gave a full statement at the station. Photographs of the bruise entered into evidence, texts pulled and preserved. A judge in Rutland, presented with the evidence within 48 hours, granted an emergency protective order before Daniel Reyes had finished explaining to his lawyer why the woman he'd reported missing had, in fact, been hiding from him the entire time. He was charged with domestic assault and stalking. He would eventually take a plea. Mara sat through the sentencing months later, watching him weep in a way that looked for once entirely unrehearsed, and felt nothing resembling forgiveness, only a tired kind of closure. Walter Finch resigned quietly before the district could fire him. The scholarship fund's discrepancy repaid in full through a settlement his family arranged rather than face a public accounting. Mara never charged him. Embezzlement with full restitution and no victim willing to press. It fell, in the end, outside what the law could reach, though it stayed permanently, outside what the town's trust in him could survive either. He moved to Burlington within the year. Nobody in Ashford Hollow ever asked him why. And Silas Cutter kept his job at the high school, kept his cabin at the edge of Pine Brook, kept whittling birch on his porch in the evenings. Though Mara visited more now, some Sundays, bringing coffee instead of taking it, sitting with him in a silence that had finally stopped being about hiding something and started slowly being about healing it. He gave her one more thing before that first winter ended. A name. Not Callie's current name. He genuinely didn't have it. But the name of the cousin's daughter outside Burlington, a woman now in her 50s who might, if a private investigator asked carefully and gently enough, still have old paperwork, old letters, a forwarding address scrawled in a shoebox in some closet, from a girl who'd once needed somewhere quiet to become someone new. Mara hired that investigator in March, the day the frost finally broke on Miller's Creek and the water ran loud and fast beneath the old footbridge on Route 9 for the first time since November. She did not yet know, closing this file and opening that one, whether it would lead anywhere at all. But for the first time in 20 years, she believed unreservedly that her sister had walked into those woods not to vanish, but to survive. And that somewhere beyond them, under some other name, in some other town's ordinary rain, Callie Voss might still be standing at a window of her own, finally, blessedly, safe. Epilogue. The window. Elena Cortez returned to room 214 the following January, a full semester later than planned. Her name and story kept out of the local paper by a small, deliberate mercy from an editor who understood exactly what it costs a person to be turned into a headline. Her students never asked what had happened. They only noticed that she smiled less carefully now. Not less often, just less like a performance, and more like she meant it. On the first Friday, she stayed late again, grading essays with the window cracked to let in the cold, clean air. She looked out at the same stretch of parking lot and tree line where, months before, she had walked into the dark, not knowing if she'd survive the choosing. Down at the far edge of the lot, an old man in a canvas jacket was raking the last of the season's leaves into a slow, patient pile in no particular hurry, the way he did every single evening, watching over the grounds the way he always had. Quietly, faithfully, and for reasons far deeper than anyone driving past would ever think to ask. Elena watched him a moment, then went back to her grading, and did not feel afraid. The end.